Hi, good evening. It's 5th of September and it's 8 o'clock here in the Netherlands. My name is Contractor. I'm the host of this webinar. We're going to talk about web components at ING, and I'm not alone here. Next to me, Bob and Lars. Great, you're here.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Let's start with a simple question. What's your promise for the participant? What can he or she expect this upcoming hour?
Well, they can expect to learn a lot about web components, what they are, and also how we're using them at ING.
Yeah, exactly. We're looking into scaling web components all across the globe. So yeah, that's what we're gonna tell you about.
That's nice. And some live coding, I heard.
Yes,
for sure.
Live coding in front of hundreds of people. What can go wrong?
Nothing.
No.
And you're not alone here. Between you, wherever you are, and us here in studio in Amsterdam, we have some moderators, your colleagues actually, your team.
Yes?
Yes, that's correct.
When you have a question or a comment, just type it in and they will answer you personally, or they forward your question to us here at the studio, and I can forward it here at the table to Bob or Lars. So feel free, it's a live webinar, it's interactive, and that's what we like most. So just shoot. About you guys, who are you?
So my name is Bob. I work at ING for about 3.5 years, and I'm a technical lead. That mainly means that I'm in the lead of the development of the My ING application. I don't do development myself anymore, but I'm into the architecture and leading the development teams.
And you, Lars?
Hey, I'm Lars den Bakker. I am a developer at ING, and I work on the main ING banking application. That's what I do.
Okay. Front end, both of you?
Yes, correct.
Yes.
What about ING? What is it what you like so much about working?
Yeah, so for me, it's awesome that we have this huge scale. We bring our solutions, our front-end solutions to a lot of customers, and I think that's just awesome to work on that. Because every time you're on a birthday or anything, everybody always has an opinion about it, or thinks about what the cool features we have. So yeah, it's pretty neat.
Yeah, and for you, Lars, what makes you tick?
So, like Bob explained, the things that we're doing is affecting a lot of customers, so that's definitely something that's interesting for me. But the other thing that I really like is that as a single developer, you can, if you have good ideas, you can influence the direction of ING and how we're doing our development, and that's what I really like about the work that I do.
You prepared a poll for the participants.
Yes.
And I actually didn't get it quite well, but I'm not a developer myself.
Yeah.
You have to make a choice. Tabs or spaces? Answer A, click on it if you are tabs. B, if you're spaces, or C, if you're both. Just type or click on the answer of your choice, and then you see also what the other respondents are favoring. And that's the cool thing about polling. I mean, we see immediately answers.
Yeah.
Cool.
What do you expect?
I'm expecting 50-50 maybe.
How's in your team?
I think it's close to 50-50. I guess the same.
It's a fierce debate always among developers.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that not a lot of people choose C, because that's using both at the same time. I'm not sure.
I think you should either choose and also choose together with your team, and don't have differences between teammates, because then your code will become a mess, in my opinion.
Okay, 51% says tabs. I will stop the poll and I will publish it. And 41% spaces, so that's 8% left for both.
Yeah.
But that's what you expected, didn't you?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But everybody knows tabs and spaces. I mean, you don't have to tell me, but...
Yeah, every developer should know about it.
Yes, and I'm not a developer.
Yes.
What will we cover today? Because what I liked about when people registered for this webinar, they could leave also some questions. You prepared those questions in your story as well, huh?
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
So what will we cover?
So yeah, we'll talk a little bit about the history of front-end at ING, and then we go into web components, explaining what they are and doing some live coding of web components. After that, we explain what we built and how we built these applications, and after that, we will show how we scale across countries. Lastly, we will do some more live coding, and so it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
And the live coding part, that's what you do, Lars?
Yes.
Because you didn't code anymore.
Yeah, that's correct.
But it might be fun to do live coding then.
Yeah.
Sure.
And once again, when you have some questions for us, just type them in, let us know, and I will put them here at the table as well. That's what we like most.
Yeah.
Just ask, and we will go into your questions. This is ING. ING's ambitions.
Yes. So ING wants to become a global bank. We really want to unify every country in the world and have the same IT stack all across the globe. So this is where we chose web components for. And we want to converge to this single solution. Let me tell you something about the scope. So ING is actually active in over 40 countries. And we're mainly focusing on NL and BE, so the Netherlands and Belgium. But of course we work together with a lot of these countries to share ideas and share architecture and stuff. In the Netherlands and Belgium we cover retail, business, but also assisted channels like call centers and also the branch offices of ING. So we also ship our code to for internal usage.
40 countries, it is?
Yes.
What do you feel in your daily job about this international spread?
A lot, actually. So, like Bob explained, we're sharing architecture. So we have sessions with development teams from all the ING countries to discuss architecture, to try and standardize what we're doing,
yes.
sharing code.
Yeah.
So even though we're working for different ING countries, we are sharing code, we are working on similar code bases and working together.
Yeah.
And also in your team, I mean, your colleagues entered in here to moderate, but it's quite international as well, huh?
Yes, yeah. So ING, it's not just Dutch people working here, there's a lot of different people working at ING, yeah.
About the history.
Yes, I will share some of the history with you. So we started way back without web. It was actually Windows applications that we built. So this is the Postbank app. You probably used a dial-up modem to use this application. And yeah, it didn't work so well, or it was at least not as user-friendly as we build stuff today.
It was great in the 90s.
Yeah, it was super great in the 90s. We were like a real digital bank back then already, so that's truly interesting. Yeah. But yeah, from a UX perspective, today you cannot do this anymore. Yeah. So at some point in time, we started to use web, and we used Java server pages, JSPs. So that means everything was rendered on the back end, and every time you had to do something or interact with this web page, you had to go back to the server, render something again, and you would get a response. So there was no interactivity involved, and also no client-side validation, for instance. So this was not that great, and only after a couple of years we started to introduce Angular. And with Angular we actually introduced all of these real front-end things that we know today that are useful, like validation, like reusable components, but also like, for instance, unit testing on the front end and end-to-end testing on the front end. So we saw really front-end development as a craft from that point on. What's also important to notice is that we used back-end APIs to interact with the front end. So we use XHRs or AJAX calls. And what's interesting is that most of those APIs we still use today, but yeah, we changed this front end gradually to the new standard, the new stack, which is web components. Yeah, so today it kind of looks like this. This is a transfer money screen. And yeah, it's just more modern, built with web components. So yeah, let's dive into web components.
Let's do that. What about web components? I mean, for you it's business as usual, but why is web components and also this webinar so interesting for many people?
Because it's a new technology, and it's not a lot of companies are using it yet, so it's definitely a new thing that's going on. So it's definitely interesting to share our experiences and to share what we're doing. And it's actually interesting first to look into what people already know about web components. So we have a poll for that.
Yeah. I just published it.
Yeah, okay.
Great. It's the same as the first poll, but if you jumped in later, you just have to click on the answer of your choice, and only after clicking you see how the other participants have voted. Have you ever used web components before? Answer A, no, it's completely new to me. Answer B, no, I only heard or read about it. Answer C, yes, I've played around with it. Or answer D, yes, I'm using it on a project. And in case it's answer D is your answer, just let us know which kind of project. We're also
that will be interesting
from you as well. Huh?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I mean, we have a crowd over there. And I'll wait, just finalize your voting. So answer A, no, it's completely new to me. Answer B, you read about it. Answer C, you played around. Or answer D, you're currently working on, or you just worked on a project using web components. 250 people already voted. So that's
cool.
Nice.
Wow.
That's an audience. 40% says, no, I only heard or read about it. 24% played around, 19% is using it on a project.
Right. Cool. Probably some ING colleagues watching are tipping the scale there also a little bit, because yeah, that's what we're using, of course. But that's definitely what I expected as well, that people have heard about it, they're not really sure yet what it is exactly, they haven't maybe used it yet, but it's something that they hear.
Yeah, to me it's not surprising. I think we're like almost one of the single companies that actually uses web components. There are a couple of others, especially enterprises, and it's a lot of used in front-end UI libraries. But then again, yeah, the adoption is not that great. Most
well, it's slowly rising. It's slowly rising.
Piece. It's getting there. No. It's getting more popular. I mean, that's true.
56% never heard of it.
Yes.
But 44% played around with it or actually used it.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's great.
It's more than 4 out of 10 people knows how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's cool.
Thanks for voting. Some questions from Andreas Otto. What is the biggest advantage of web components over a system like React or Angular?
Well, that's a really tough question. There's very many answers to that question. And actually, maybe
give us the right answer.
The right answer is there is no clear advantage. It's not meant as a replacement. It's rather meant as a low-level building tool.
Yeah.
So web components are a collection of low-level browser APIs that are intended to enable component-based development on the web. But it's funny that we get this question straight away, because that's really a big misconception that's out there right now, is that web components are intended to replace frameworks or libraries. And that's not the case. So they're not going to be replacing React or Angular or Vue anytime soon. Rather, the intention is that they are low-level components, low-level capabilities built into the browser that can be reused by existing frameworks and libraries in order to give them new capabilities, in order to let them ship less code so that they actually can be faster, and also to enable us to build reusable components. So when there is a standard component model on the web, we can actually build that date picker once, and we don't have to rebuild it every time we're moving between different frameworks.
Yeah. Yeah. What's also nice is that it's here to stay. It's a standard, a browser standard. So yeah, it's written down. It will never go away. Basically, it will only add. It will be more features added on top of the platform. So that's really cool, I think.
Yeah. Exactly.
Want to hear more questions from participants?
Yeah,
because that's what they're doing.
For sure.
Go ahead.
Jurgen, are web components only a thing of things like Vue and Angular, or are there standalone options?
A thing of things?
Yeah, a thing of things.
A thing of things. That's an interesting way of phrasing that. I think what they mean is there something that you can like use standalone, or can you only use them through like other frameworks and libraries?
You can use them standalone, and that's what we're showing in the live code. It's actually really simple to get started and use web components really purely.
Yeah, and there's actually on this slide there's an example of that. So on GitHub they are actually using web components, and they're using them raw. So actually in the code snippet you can see it's a little bit of a simplified example, but you could see how you could make the element that's being used on GitHub. So on GitHub they have this column where they're displaying the last time that a file was edited. And if you inspect it, you don't see regular divs or spans or regular HTML elements. You see custom elements. So GitHub is using one of the most important web component APIs, and it's called the custom element specification. And it lets GitHub say to the browser, whenever you see this element, I want to attach some custom behavior to it. So that's a really good example of how it's being used.
Yeah.
Question from Jeroen, because what I feel or read in the chat, how did you convince the organization to start with web components? Do you migrate step by step?
Yes, so we indeed migrated step by step. That's really true. But also we of course proved it. So we tried stuff out. We experimented, and only after a lot of experimentation we could start using it at scale. So actually the first ones to start with web components was ING in Australia. They were quite successful with it. I think it was even Polymer before version 1.
Yeah.
And they were so excited about it, and we did a couple of workshops, and that got us convinced to start adopting it actually.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's, we come to that later. But it's not. I mean, that's also this question from Rob. How have you chosen to migrate from Angular to JS to web components while this technology is still not in a mature state? I mean, you're really
we're pushing the
progressive.
boundaries. Yeah,
I'd say it is in a mature state actually today, and that's actually something we'll see once we get to talking about the browser support.
Yeah.
Although it's definitely true when we started out, it was not yet in a mature state. So we started with this 3 years ago, I think.
Yes.
Then it was still a little bit experimental,
Yeah.
but now they're actually a standard in all of the browsers.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And Twitter is also using it.
exactly, yes. And Twitter is actually using it in a really cool way. So Twitter is actually using another really cool new web component API called Shadow DOM. So the difference between Twitter and GitHub, on GitHub they were just rendering some text and they were just letting the page do all of the styling. But on Twitter, what you can do is embed tweets from Twitter onto other websites or web pages. It's something that we've probably done at some point. And but Twitter doesn't have just a small piece of text. They actually have a fully styled card. They have buttons, there's links in there. There's a lot going on inside of this component. And they want to make sure that this looks good on every page. And anyone including this component on their page, they want to make sure that it doesn't mess up with the styling of the rest of the page. And this is where Shadow DOM comes in. So what they're actually doing, and you can actually see that in the picture, all of the HTML of the Twitter tweet web component is inside the shadow root. And this shadow root makes sure that any styling from the outside page doesn't actually affect the styling of the inside of the web component, and any styling of the web component doesn't affect the rest of the page.
Yeah.
So you can actually use this on any web page and it will always look the same.
Yeah, we call this style encapsulation, right?
Yes, this is encapsulation. And in the past, the only way we could actually do this was using iframes, which brings a lot of other issues like security problems. And this is actually a lot more convenient to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just mentioned browsers, Lars, and there's also a question from Pim, put it public as well, so you can see it's truly a question from Pim. What's ING's browser support and how do you keep the site work quickly in all browsers?
Well, we support the latest 2 versions of the modern browsers.
Yeah.
So that's Chrome, Firefox, Safari, and Edge. That's at least what we test. So everything that we release, we test it. We do bug fixes for older versions depending on how many users we still have on those browsers. And we also still, unfortunately, support Internet Explorer. It's unfortunately because, it's a browser that's no longer being actively developed upon. So any new features like web components, they're not supported on Internet Explorer.
But luckily, Internet Explorer will be of the past when the new Edge is coming out.
I hope so,
Yes.
definitely. I did mention one thing about Edge. So Edge supports web components, but only in the beta version right now. I'm hoping that the beta version will become the real version somewhere this year still.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's one thing about Edge.
Anything more to tell about browsers?
Yeah, so like I said, Internet Explorer doesn't support web components. So for that, we're using polyfills. So polyfills are JavaScript libraries that mimic the behavior of a web standard. And that lets us use web components also on Internet Explorer. So that's what we do.
Yeah. So in that way, we can support almost all of our customers, basically. They're just a tiny amount, a little tiny percentage with people that have really exotic browsers, which we cannot support, of course. But that will always be the case. Yeah.
What's the biggest benefit for the customer, if any, asks G. Buster?
The biggest benefit is performance. So because these APIs are built into the browser, we don't need to ship really big frameworks or libraries or lots of extra code in order to set this up. That's the big benefit for our customers.
And next to that, we are able to really iterate quite fast in our solutions and the stuff we build, thanks to web components, so we can ship new features very quickly, actually. So that's also, I think, a benefit.
Yeah.
And what's the negative side of web component compared to frameworks like React or Angular? Is a question from Nick.
Yeah, I can answer that. So, because there's not a huge adoption yet, there's not too much standardized. So we have to figure some stuff out ourselves and create our own standards, our own documentation, stuff like that. For Angular, it's all laid out. There's clear guidelines for everything. The same goes for React, I suppose, because there's just a bigger community behind it. But luckily, Web Components is catching up there as well. And there are really some interesting websites regarding the standardization of how to use web components in the nicest way.
A good one to mention there also is actually developer experience. So as ING, we're always hiring developers, and it's actually easier to find developers with a lot of experience in popular frameworks than it is with web components.
That's true.
So that's also something that's to be considered.
Can I use web components in combination with other tools and languages like, for example, ELM? Is a question from Julien.
I think so.
ELM.
So Elm specifically.
It is Elm, yes. Sometimes you have to correct me, of course.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
I know about Elm. I think I also know who's asking this question.
I know this guy.
But I don't have experience with it myself, so I don't actually know if that's possible.
But there are a couple of languages or frameworks even that compile to Java, to web components in JavaScript.
Yeah, but actually what's really good to mention here though is that web components are just regular HTML. So actually the question is rather reversed. Does this library or framework support HTML than it supports web components?
Yeah, exactly.
Your friends in moderation, like Pascal says, say you can. With a big smile.
Smarty pants.
Yes.
All right.
You know who is handing over your beer later this night.
Great.
Let's go to
continue.
Your technology stack.
Yeah, so we actually covered a lot of this, but what's good to mention is that what most people will come into contact using web components will probably be through using component libraries. So let's say you're building a website and it's in material design, you can use the web components built with material design. That's what most people will come into how most people will come into contact with web components. But at ING, we're actually taking this a lot further. So we're not only building our UI components using web components, but we're actually building everything using web components. Yeah. And that's a big benefit for us. So we already talked a little bit about choosing to do a framework or not. But the big thing that we encountered when we're using a big framework is that we work with a lot of teams who are working in a lot of countries, and they're all building small pieces of functionality that all need to come together in multiple applications. And if we're all using a framework, then the way that these teams combine all their code is through some custom format of a specific framework. Yeah. And that means we're locked into this framework. So frameworks have breaking changes, frameworks have updates, and we need to coordinate these updates across all of these teams. Yeah. And so what we want to try to do instead is say we standardize on web components. That's what teams are building. And then the underlying technology we're using to build them doesn't matter as much. Yeah. And we actually have a lot more freedom to do migrations and changes and updates. Yeah. And we're actually doing this right now. So when we started out using web components, we chose Polymer as a library to build them. But there were a few things in there that as we learned, we didn't like them so much, and we were looking for alternatives. And we looked for different libraries, different options, and we ended up with lit-HTML. But we didn't need to do this migration like Big Bang. We didn't need everyone to do a big update. We can actually do this update step by step. And that's what you see in the picture. There are teams using lit-HTML, there are teams using Polymer, there are teams using both at the same time. And this is really what we think is a big benefit for us using web components.
Yeah, so we basically create our own framework by picking libraries and also building our own libraries, and have really single-purpose libraries, so we can gradually migrate from one library to another, or even replace one. Yeah, it makes us very, very flexible, and that's just a nice thing.
Yep.
You promised live coding.
Yes.
Woo.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
What are you going to do?
What I'm going to do is, well, build a web component. Very basic. Very basic, very simple. Not a lot going on, but just the basics. How do you set it up? And then using vanilla web component, but also using lit-HTML, because that's what we use to build them.
And we share your screen. I mean,
yes.
You can put it on a full screen yourself, the video screen. So
yes, and I will zoom in. But if it's too small, definitely let us know in the chat. Yeah. Then I can zoom in a little bit more.
Okay, cool. And ask anything. I mean, what are the typical questions people can ask Lars right now?
Yeah, everything from syntax to what libraries you need, from the tooling that you need. Well, actually none. That's great. I think it's all supported in the platform. So yeah.
Are we on the screen?
Can you switch?
You are right now.
There we go. Okay, so hello world. Okay, we're live. So this is my code editor. Here's the browser, and here is the terminal from the browser. And we're not using any build tooling. This is just a simple index HTML, and there's nothing fancy going on. So we're going to stay a little bit in the theme of the GitHub time elements, and we will use, we're going to make a component that localizes a date. So when you're building a web component, the first thing that you need to start with is making a class that extends from HTML element. An HTML element, it's a class that actually always existed in the browser. Just now with web components, we can actually extend from it. And the second thing that you need to do is let the browser know that your component exists. So you can do that using the custom elements.define, and then you can give it a name, and you give it a reference to your class. So what the browser will now do, anytime it sees this tag name, it will actually instantiate this class and call some lifecycle callbacks on it.
So every web component you can recognize by it having a dash somewhere.
Yes, so web components must have a dash in order to not confuse it from native elements. Yes. So we're just saying hello world, save this. Nothing's going on yet because we haven't actually loaded this file. So what we're going to do is add a script tag, and you can actually load modules now in the browser. So we can actually load our script as a module, and then we're going to add this element to the page so that the browser will actually start to display it.
Question in between from Jurgen. Is there any web components you've open sourced yourself?
Good question.
Good question.
We're going to cover it.
That's a silly answer.
Well, yes is the answer.
Yes.
Yes, and we're going to share a link in a minute. So stay tuned.
Yeah. So we got hello world on the console, and our web component is being shown. So in this example, we're using the custom elements API. It's pretty basic. So what we got here is actually a reference to a regular element. So we can use any of the imperative element APIs to start rendering something. For example, we can use inner HTML to render out a piece of HTML. So we could say, hello world. It's very uninspired. And it would actually be displayed on the screen. But this is not a great developer experience. We don't want to do templating using imperative APIs. And this is actually why we're using lit-HTML and lit-element, because they let us make this experience a lot better. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to import lit-element from a library. So lit-HTML is split up into two different libraries. Lit-HTML does HTML templating, and lit-element is how you can use that with web components. And what they give you is actually a different base class that your component needs to extend from. So instead of extending from HTML element, I'm actually extending from lit element. And then the second thing is that lit element gives you a bunch of different lifecycle callbacks. And the simplest one is the render callback. And if you're used to React, this is actually very similar to how React works, except that we're not using JSX, but we're actually using template literals. And lit-HTML uses a special type of template literals called tagged template literals. And how that works is you put a tag in front of a template string or a string literal called HTML, and this lets you actually write HTML. And this is how lit-HTML knows how to update and how to efficiently render your component. So we're going to continue with the Hello World theme. And it should be displayed on the page. Okay, this is a good basic example of how we can set up a web component using lit-HTML and lit-element.
Cool. I hope it's clear for the participants. I mean, it's quiet in the chat.
It's quiet.
I mean, no. I mean, I think it's wonderful for them to understand.
Yep.
Not me included. Bob.
Yes.
A question from Bob. How do you name the components within ING? Are there any best practices for embeddable components like the Twitter feed you showed earlier?
Yes, so we use a couple of namespaces to avoid naming conflicts in our components, because if two components have the same name, you get errors, you get clashes, and we don't like that. We would get JavaScript runtime errors. So it's important to have namespaces for your own components, and make sure that you also test the integration of your component when you deploy them.
And a question here from Salvatore Vitale. What resources would you recommend to get started with web components?
There is a really good open source website. It's called openwc.org. I may or may not be biased because I actually work on it, but it's a good starting place to learn about web components. Also, the lit element homepage, at the end of the slide deck, there is a link to that. And that's also a really great resource to get started.
Yeah, cool.
We still have 30 minutes left for this live webinar. Building a banking app.
All right. Yeah. So we are actually building applications with these custom elements and this shadow DOM. So take a look at our application. This is what it looks like. You might be familiar with it. It's the banking application we use in the Netherlands, and actually it's being rolled out in Belgium now as well. So this application has over 2 million customers monthly. And also, as you can see, it's here in Dutch, but you can also switch to English, of course. So how did we get to this huge application? Because behind this, there's a lot of functionality. And we actually started out quite small, only with a couple of teams. One platform team who takes care of the application, and two feature teams who take care of the actual functionality for customers. So we started out with the most critical features, like transferring money, showing your accounts, and of course, showing your transactions. One of the most important features in my eyes was the feedback feature, because from these 1,500 customers where we rolled out to, we got early feedback on what they thought about this new application we shipped. So piece by piece, we expanded, we got feedback, we fixed things, got more features in there, more customers in there, more teams joining the development. And yes, here we are today with over 40 teams working on it. And it makes us real proud. We were there from the start, and now we're shipping it to, planning to ship it to even 8 million customers.
So 8 million. How many people are in one team?
So there are 6 to 8 people in the team, and that doesn't mean that it's all front-end developers, of course. So we have different people working on different things in teams, and approximately 2 or 3 people in the team are working on front-end.
So, I mean, 3 years ago it was you and 5-6 persons, and now it's about 300 persons working on this banking app.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
How is that to make something in such a short notice, actually? Which is so impactful for so many customers.
It's a lot of fun. And it's also very challenging because there's lots of people with different levels of experience building these things. And you have to make sure that we're all doing the same things and that it's all working together correctly. So it's also quite a challenge.
Yeah. Did you have any growing pains scaling up? Question by Jurgen.
Yeah,
Tell us about it.
Well, it's like we said, there is a community, but especially a couple of years ago, the community was very small, so we needed to figure out a lot of things by ourselves. Yeah. So it was a lot of vallen en opstaan, we say in the Netherlands. But ultimately, it all worked out pretty good.
And especially, like we talked before, so many teams, and they're all building things and just making sure that everything works correctly when it comes together in the application. That's definitely something where we really iterated over different solutions and changed things up in order to get to the right point.
Yeah.
But then, I mean, you showed ING's ambitions in the beginning of this webinar.
Yeah.
Now it's 40 teams. So how is it about when we're 3 years ahead? I mean, how many teams are then working on this same banking app? What do you think?
Who's going to tell? I think across the world we have so many engineers. There are over 50,000 people working at ING. I don't know how much of that is IT, but it's really a lot. And we serve so many customers globally. So yeah, I expect it only to become more and more.
Yeah. Nice. The component library.
Yeah, so as you saw in the previous screenshot, we use components. Everything is built of web components, but we also have the UI components. And the UI components are built by a team within ING, and these components are reused across all of the applications globally. So these components are really good accessible, so that's very important for us nowadays, to have inclusive design principles built in our applications. Next to that, they also follow the global design guidelines. So we have one set of UX standardized across ING. And of course, this team is not working solely on their own on these components. Teams can contribute to the component library as well. So that's pretty cool. And there was a question by Jurgen about if we also consume existing components from external vendors, for instance. And yeah, we take a good look at those components. We get inspired by them, but yeah, ultimately, most of the times we roll out our own actually, because we have some specific needs, or maybe some components were not performing that well. We had that in the past. So
and it's usually actually accessibility. So accessibility
Also.
is something that's very often forgotten with front-end development, but it's something that we take very seriously. So that's often a reason for us to build something for ourselves.
Yeah, and what's cool about this is that this component library is actually partially open source. So we have a white label set of these components that are available on GitHub.
Andy, that's a question from, who was it? Adam, how do you guys organize all your web components internally? How do you avoid developers creating similar web components, for instance?
Yeah, so we have an internal marketplace. There is a website where everybody publishes their web components, so you can take a look at other people's components as well. And we have demo pages, we have documentation in there, so you can look around in the marketplace and grab the components for other teams if you want. Yeah. And of course, there's always the risk that people build duplicate things. Then at some point teams should be aligning and work together on a single solution, preferably.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there are projects which aren't suited for web components? This is a question from Kevin Coops.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the primary project where web components are suitable for is actually design systems and component libraries. So if you're building a library with just basic UI components that need to be reused across different projects and applications, that's definitely where web components shine. And then I think for our use case, when you're a big enterprise and you have a lot of different teams, that's also where I think web components make a lot of sense. But if you're smaller companies with maybe 1 or 2 or 3 developer teams working on a project, maybe at this point in time, web components might not be the best choice. But it's an evolving standard, and there are lots of new things coming up all the time. So I definitely think that it will grow into this space as well.
Yeah.
Aaron's asking, do you use an existing solution for state management in Forms, for example?
Oh yeah, we not necessarily for Forms, but we do use Redux in our applications. Not that heavily though, only really if we have shared states, and that's in our application quite limited actually.
Yeah.
Only, I believe some of the, you know exactly what it is.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the areas where we learned a lot. So we started out full on Redux everything, and that's actually where we learned, because we have so many teams who need to work in isolation, that wasn't the best fit for us.
Yes.
Our components are a little bit more encapsulated, but what we sometimes use is Redux within certain web components.
Yeah, so for more like local state actually, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
What's the screenshot?
So this is GitHub, the website. You can see the web component here, the time ago component. It's actually the ING Bank's Lion project on GitHub. These are our open source components. This is actually also used in all of our applications. Only we have some styling over it. These are the white label components, but all of the functionality is actually in there, so you can take a look around and play around with them and maybe add your own styling to it and use them in your projects. Yeah. So we're really proud of sharing this today with you guys.
Aren't you helping your competitors then? Or?
Yeah, we're not too worried about that.
Yeah, I think as ING we're using a lot of open source software, and it's actually that's something that more companies are doing, is also giving back to the open source community and giving back what you're doing.
And we can also learn a great deal from it, you know, and people can actually contribute. So that's I think it's a great thing.
We'll also have a poll question about this one, about sharing actually.
Yes.
Did you ever contribute to an open source project yourself? Yes, many times. Answer A. Answer B, yes, only a couple of times. Answer C, just one time. Or answer D, no, never. Let us know by just clicking on your answer. In the meantime, a question from Roger. How do you combine and style all web components into one application like React or Angular? Just combine those web components, or do you still use other library to combine everything?
Well, that's a big question. How do you combine and style them together?
It's mainly about
into one application, like React or Angular. Just combining them, or do you still use other libraries to combine?
So I think you can build web components and you can use them inside of React and Angular. Especially Angular works really well with web components. React, there are a couple of things that React doesn't handle that well, especially around events. So that's something definitely to look up. And then in terms of styling, that really depends on your situation. So if you're already working with global style sheets, then maybe you can use web components without shadow DOM, and then you can just style them as regularly. That really depends on your situation.
Yeah.
You can still vote on a poll. So did you ever contribute to an open source project? But I can already say about 50% did.
That's great.
1 out of 10 many times, 40% a couple of times, 14% just one time. So only 35% of the participants never contributed to an open source project. This is the kind of audience you like.
It's actually quite a lot. I think it's interesting to see.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, because I think everybody uses open source libraries, you know, so it's good to, like you said, contribute back sometimes.
Yeah, and they're usually pretty happy. Like even a small typo change in the documentation is something that they really like, because they're just doing it in their spare time.
Exactly.
Question from Andreas. Would you recommend working with web components for smaller companies who are developing software from scratch?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, my personal opinion, I really like working with lit-HTML and lit-element. I really think that it has a really great developer experience, and I really like that you can use it without any build tooling, so it's easy for people to get started, and they don't have to learn a lot of things. So I definitely think that works really well for those use cases. And
at least try it out for a day or so, and see if you like it and if it's good for you. And
Let's talk about features.
Yeah.
And so then we also have some time left for the extra part of live coding.
Let's save some time for that. Yeah.
Cool. Features.
All right. So features are at the heart of our applications. These are the places where the customer can interact with the application and, for instance, get a loan or get a car insurance or make a money transfer, stuff like that. And so here you see an actual feature, and as you can see, we have the namespaces here in place. So ing feed is the namespace that we use for features, and ing des is the namespace for our UI components. And as you can see, we have the feature is composed of UI components, and they all work together inside of this feature to make this post from this form and actually do the API call. And if we take a look at the architecture of a feature, then it's important to notice that features are completely isolated. They are also isolated tested. So we want to be able to lift up a feature and put it in a different application as easy as possible. So they're really loosely coupled to the application. The feature doesn't know anything about their surroundings. It only gets data via properties and sends out events via regular DOM events. And in that way, we can update the surrounding application. And like mentioned, it's important to know that a feature does its own API call, and it's often that feature teams are completely responsible from front to back of this feature.
Yeah, because how does it work as a feature team, Lars?
Yeah, so a feature team, I think we already talked a little bit about teams. At ING, we work agile, so we have teams of about 6 to 8 people with mixed disciplines. So there's business, IT, ops, data analysts, depending on your team. But they're all in one team, and they're all working together, responsible for one or multiple features that are actually delivering value to our customers. And as Bob mentioned, there's front end and the back end usually in one team. So they're working together for providing this functionality, and they are responsible for the entire life cycle. So from the conception of a feature to developing it, testing it themselves. We don't have dedicated testers. You're responsible for it yourself. Deploying it to production. And then once it's in production, you're responsible for making sure it keeps working and to keep on improving. So gathering user feedback. It's even developers read user feedback and they actually, they learn from it. And to improve and
look at the business monitoring, look at what events are there in the stats, and see how much it is used. Maybe you can do some performance improvements. All of that stuff is possible working in.
And when you have 2 million unique visitors on your feature a month, that's, I mean, you receive some feedback, of course.
It's definitely.
I think it's cool when you're developing on such a, even it's a tiny part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely, and I really like going and thinking about how we can improve things, how we can make things better, and actually being able to develop that. So sometimes you'll see that something is not working correctly, and you can fix it, and it can be in production the next week, and that's just a really great. Great
question from Dennis: how do you test these components? Which frameworks do you use?
So with lit-HTML, we're using Karma. Karma, it's been around for quite a while, but it's
we use it with Angular.
Yeah, we use it with Angular as well. But that's what we use mostly. So that's doing both unit tests, so testing our JavaScript, but also doing our end-to-end tests, so really interacting with the DOM elements.
More of the functional tests are also covered with Karma. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I got a question here from Anu Priya. Would you suggest any specific build or packaging tools when using web components?
Not specifically for web components, so any build tools that you're already using can work. I think the two most popular build tools right now are Webpack and Rollup.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Rollup. That's something I can definitely recommend for people to use.
And we actually use Webpack now in production, and it gave us great performance improvements, not only runtime, but also in build speed actually. So yeah, we're really happy with Webpack today at ING.
Two short questions, two short answers, and then we proceed. From Björn, do you build analytics into the components or in the apps?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, so it's built, well, at least you define it in the features, in the components actually, and then everything propagates, the events bubble up to the application, and the application makes sure that they go to the right place. So for instance, you could have a different system for analytics in a different country maybe, so we really do not want to tightly couple that in a sense. Yeah.
And what about a future, Joseph is asking, are web components to stay forever? He says, I guess not. But so any insight on what new front-end technology are currently in the pipeline? Any trends you see or your ear on?
Well, nothing is forever in software, anything that's so the browser always guarantees backwards compatibility. So it depends on how you want to answer that question. As long as browsers exist, web components will exist. Yeah. But of course, it remains to be seen whether people will want to keep on using it. That's definitely true. Yeah. But I actually think that there are a lot of really cool things coming up with web components that definitely make it worthwhile.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, let's talk about how we reuse our features and our web applications across countries.
Because that's important at a large company like ING.
It really, really is. So we're quite successful with our application and all of the features that we built. So we had happy customers, happy developers, happy business. They want to reuse this application to more countries. Yeah. So we started out with Belgium, and Belgium, quite challenging market to do, but
let's conquer the world.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's start with Belgium. So we thought about this: how can we scale this application? And we came up with two very important rules. One was, let's reuse the complete code base, because if we would fork stuff or copy stuff, we would just have duplicate code and we would be in big trouble. That's not scalable in our eyes. What's also important is that the API should remain the same. We do not want to write all kinds of transformations in our front end, which you have to duplicate across multiple applications and stuff. We just want the APIs to, the contracts to the APIs and the front end to remain the exact same way. But of course, there will be changes or like small differences, functional differences between the Netherlands and in Belgium. And that can be due to many reasons, like regulations or legal reasons. So we thought about that, and we also came up with a solution for this. And yeah, solution is actually don't do these differences, because it's just hard. It's challenging to maintain, you should just try to get stuff as similar as possible.
Yeah, so that's a conversation that we have with our business.
A daily conversation.
To try and make sure that we minimize the differences between countries, so that it's actually easier to reuse things.
Yeah, exactly. Because in the end, a customer is a customer. A banking product is oftentimes very similar in a different country. So yeah, that's the first aim for us. But of course, if that's not possible, we came up with a solution. And the solution was partially an API, introducing an API that has knowledge of where a customer is coming from. And in this API, we define some properties, some configuration, which we send down to the application, and the features consume these meaningful properties. And we set those properties, and based on these properties, we can just turn things on or off, basically. So in this example, you see a transfer money screen, And in Belgium, there's no such thing as a payment reference field. So we can just turn that off by configuring the API in the right manner. And yeah, by using this, we can actually have differences not only between Belgium, but also when we would go to another country or even serve different markets. For instance, also looking into the business customers, they also have some different capabilities, some of the features. Yeah.
Question for Mike, how do you handle inter-component communication? Does the container app expose an event bus or something completely different?
That's close.
Yes, something like that. So what we try to minimize is communication between features.
Yes.
So that's something we try to minimize, and we're seeing that there's very limited cases where we need that. When we do need that, we try to create an abstraction that the feature can let the application know about something that they need, and then the application can decide what to do with it. But besides that, features are usually pretty isolated,
yes.
And they just manage the things internally.
Yeah. One thing to add to this slide is what we mainly aim for here is that we do not have a lot of conditional logic in our components, like checking if NL, if BE, if DE, if business. Yeah, that would not scale at all. We just want to have it somewhere else, that logic, and only pass meaningful stuff to the features. That's the way we do it.
How do you control code standards between different countries? Question by Kevin.
Having a website that's available to everybody, coming up with indeed code standards, but also like a shared definition of done. Also, we have an academy online where you can, where we teach developers, or developers actually teach other developers certain techniques and certain standards. So yeah, there's actually a lot in place, and I think also via this webinar, for instance, it's a good means to
But also,
to share.
we don't need all the teams to choose tabs or spaces. Different teams can do different things, so they definitely have a relative amount of freedom to choose within the team what works best for them. So definitely we don't try to enforce the same thing everywhere, only when it makes sense and when it's useful to do.
Yeah, there's a nuance there, I agree.
We promised an additional live coding session when we're on time. We're on time.
Okay.
So if you start it up,
Yes.
Lars, and I have two questions which I'll put forward to you, Bob.
That's great.
From Michiel, since web components leans on JS so heavily, how does this technique score on SEO and page speed? Will Google still be able to read and like our web page?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So SEO is definitely a challenging concept always when you're talking about client-side applications. So currently we are just doing stuff behind the login, so it will not be indexed by Google. So we are kind of safe there. But however, we are looking into using using web components on the public website as well. And that would mean that we either have to trust Google on running our JavaScript, but I'm not sure if we can trust in that sense. And also we do not know in the future if there will be another search engine. And some people like myself use DuckDuckGo, and then it will not be indexed for that browser or that search engine, I mean. So yeah, we are looking into, or we actually using today a crawler, like a headless browser that indexes all of the pages and puts them on a server and serves them out to crawlers whenever they request them. So that actually works. There's a project by Google called RenderTron, which you could look up, and that could solve your problem for your client-side applications on the public website.
Question from Andreas, do you reduce components to very small components, e.g. having a maximum amount of lines of code for a component or a function?
Yes, so it's always advisable to not have these immense long files, you know, it's just not nicely navigable. You should split up your components, at least the view from the logic, from the actual API calls and stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So just basically regular coding practices also apply here. Don't make things too big, split things up.
Exactly.
That's really good. Web components are great for componentizing.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, that's definitely true. And especially now with lit element, I think you're going to show it, to have separate templates to have them separate from your business logic. Yeah,
Yep.
I think that's
Lars, your live coding.
Yes.
A couple of
Let's
minutes
go.
left.
So we started actually out very ambitiously going with a localized date component, and we were going to do things with dates. But you guys asked so many great questions that we didn't actually get to that in the first session. So here we're actually just gonna, I'm just gonna show you a few pretty important things, and also things that people asked actually in the questions before the webinar. And they were mostly around styling. So I will show you how you can add styling to this component using lit element. And the way that works is just like HTML, you can import a CSS tag, and you can use that to define the styles of your component. So I can say, for example, that the strong inside here has a blue color. Let's see how that works. So here I'm actually doing something that in the CSS world is completely not done, and I'm actually styling something using a tag name. But in this case, it's completely fine because I'm using shadow DOM. So lit element by default renders something in shadow DOM, and I'm in complete control of whatever element this styling might apply to. Whereas if you're using a traditional style sheet, you don't know which elements this will apply to, and you need to be careful with how you set up your selectors and those kind of things. So that's a really great feature about web components in shadow DOM, is that it's actually easy to manage CSS because they're already encapsulated to this component. Now, so shadow DOM encapsulates the CSS of your component, but you often run into some customization that you want to do. And that's actually a question from David before the webinar, is how can you do customization? How can you customize the styling of a web component? And the way you can do that is actually through CSS variables. CSS variables are not related to web components, but they're a pretty new thing that was added to CSS. And so the way you can do that is you can define a custom CSS property, and you do that using a var. And then you can set a default, so in this case it will stay blue. But now I can actually use this CSS property from the outside in order to set a different color on my component. So for example, I can go back to my index.html and I can define a style tag. So let's say this is my application, or I'm consuming this component, and I can say, I can actually create two instances of this component, and I'm going to give them a class. One is red and the other is pink. And I can say, okay, the pink one, there is this variable called localized date color, and it's actually pink. And the red one has a localized date color that should be red. And as you can see here in the browser, that component is in there twice, but one is red and the other is pink. So this is what you can do to customize the styling of your web component. Nice. How are we doing on the time?
We have 2 minutes left. Right. Some people are asking who's the beautiful woman in the background. Bob, tell us.
Yeah, it's my wife. Hey, babe.
Nice. She would figure out what you were doing actually late at night, huh?
Yeah, I understand.
Any questions left from you? Because I mean, we're coming to the end of this webinar. Let us know, and the moderation is also going on for some minutes till all the questions are answered. But let us know. We come to the end, Bob.
Yes. So some of you might be familiar with this picture or might recognize this space station. It's the International Space Station, and we have this analogy that we want to build this nice platform for features to build upon. And yeah, we want feature teams to work together on this spaceship and to launch their features autonomously, just like all the countries working on the ISS work together on this big, huge spaceship. So that's an analogy we like to make.
Does it really feel for you working at ING that way? Because I mean, you're so many developers, front-end, back-end, you're building a spaceship?
For me, yeah. Yeah, it's like proper engineering, you know? Huh? Yeah.
In a financial system, it's important for consumers to have work properly, for business, for retail. I can imagine it's really cool doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
it really is.
When someone asks when the next webinar is, we don't know. Well, that's a good question.
Yeah, we should do one like completely live code,
Yeah, I didn't get to almost everything that I had for the live coding, so yeah.
Yeah, but how can people connect with you? I mean, this on this slide,
Yeah.
But if people like to learn more from you or from web components, what would you advise them?
So a great way to connect with us is actually on Slack, the Polymer Slack channel. So that's on the slide. We're on GitHub. We're on LinkedIn. You can connect with us. So those are ways to reach us.
Yeah, and if you want to learn more, there are also some nice resources below. So OpenWC was mentioned. Also, we have the webpage of Lit Element on GitHub. And also Google has some really nice resources on web components, so about custom elements and shadow DOM. They explain it really, really well.
when I start thanking you, etc., and of course, when I close this webinar, a small survey pops up, and we ask you kindly to complete it. It's only a couple of minutes, but it gives us valuable feedback on how you like this webinar, what we can improve for the next webinar maybe. But let us know. It's very helpful to us. Final question to you, Lars. I mean, why is it so nice for someone to have this ambition to become a web component developer yourself? What do you suggest him or her?
You mean, sorry,
to stimulate someone to go into depth of web components? What does it deliver you?
I think it's the future. So I really think that web components have the future, and I really think that it's good to gain experience and seeing how to work with these things.
Yeah. And Bob, I mean, the intention of this webinar was to inspire a lot of people about what you're doing at ING with web components.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I hope that you had a great time and you found it interesting. We are very happy to hear about your projects, what you do with web components, but also to hear if you have any questions or any suggestions or stuff we should look into. And thanks for joining.
Great, on my behalf as well, I thank to the moderators who got a lot of questions which they answered to you directly or publicly. But thank you for participating. It was great fun. So many people, about 300
Time
persons.
flew by.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I hope to see you next time and wish you a great night or day wherever you are in the world. But enjoy. Bye-bye.